Buongiorno, good morning, guten Morgen. I'm Maria Stieglecker, and I'm your conferencier for today, for the second day of our conference. And I have to say, it's really a pity it's the last day of the conference because it was so well organized and we are so much nice group, and I think everybody would like to stay longer in Fabriano than these 2 days. So let's start with Silvia Hufnagel today from the Árni Magnússon Institute in Reykjavik in Iceland. She did study German philology, art history, and what's your third? I never... Sociology of literature. I always have difficulties to spell it. At the universities of Salzburg and Copenhagen. She also had some stays in Iceland, Sweden, and Finland. With her project Paper Trails, which was funded by the Árnis, the research foundation of Iceland. She also got a guest researcher at our institute, and she organized an international conference, a very good one, 3 weeks ago, with the title Paper Stories in Reykjavik. And she has new plans about research on paper in Iceland, and I think we will hear more about it now. It's your turn.
Okay, thank you very much. So I feel a bit cheating today because I'm not going to talk about something that I have done, but about things that I will do. And that is basically the role of watermarks in the new project Life of Paper. I'll give a brief project overview, including our collaboration partners. I'll talk about the database that we use, the watermark imaging system, as well as the encoding with a TI conformant watermark module. We are also going to use Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy and Viscol for quire structure. And I'll basically end with possible challenges and hopefully the output of the project. So for those of you who do not know yet, Iceland has a particularly intense, strong and long-lasting manuscript culture. So writing in the Latin alphabet and the codex form came with Christianization to Iceland in the year 1000. And although the printing press was already established in around 1530, that was owned by the Protestant church, which had basically no interest whatsoever to print much else than religious, edifying, theological material. So a lot of the material was basically transmitted in manuscript form until the late 19th, early 20th century. And today there are around 20,000 manuscripts extant, 19,000 of which are on paper and which are post-medieval. So in a previous project, Paper Trails, I focused on the 15th and 16th century, so the time when paper was introduced to Iceland and when it started replacing parchment. And in the new project, The Life of Paper, Cycles of Paper Production, Use and Reuse, in 17th century Iceland, I'm going to analyze paper production, the primary use of paper as a writing support, and its secondary use as paper recycling. And for that, we're going to use hyperspectral watermark imaging for paper that was recycled, and paper without watermarks, we are going to use Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, and we are going to combine an analysis of quire structures, watermarks, and textual contents. By doing that, we hope that we actually get more information on the manuscript production, on paper use. We also have 2 case studies. One of them is Bishop Brynjolfur's books of correspondence, which cover the year 1652 till 1675. There are 14 volumes extant, altogether 3,400 untrimmed leaves full of watermarks. So that's going to be exciting. We also have a second case study about Hannes Gunnlaugsson, who was a scribe active in the Westfjord, so the northwest part of Iceland. And that area has always been, already in the 16th and 17th century particularly, a really important center of manuscript production. However, mostly people focused on one very wealthy manuscript patron. So we do not know much about Hannes Gunnlaugsson, the person of our case study, but he was a really productive scribe and illuminator, and there are more than a dozen manuscripts extant by him. So this is a 3-year project housed at the Árni Magnússon Institute for Icelandic Studies in Reykjavik, and it was funded by the Icelandic Research Council, RANIS. Our most important collaboration partner is the National and University Library of Iceland. They basically house quite a considerable part of our corpus, and their staff is in charge of one of the case studies. The Fraunhofer Institute is basically owns the camera that we're going to use for the watermark imaging. A retired professor from the University of Applied Sciences is going to assist with watermark imaging. The staff of the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences in Vienna is going to conduct the infrared spectroscopy. The Landesarchiv is housing the database that we are going to use to put our data in, and the Austrian Academy of Sciences offers basically office structure and advice. So also for this project, the expertise of our cooperation partners is really invaluable to us, not least because there's a real interdisciplinary background of all of them, and that basically is really enriching the whole project. So to start with the database, we are going to use the Wasserzeichen-Informationssystem. This is a sustainable database. It allows for decentralized data input of international and, most importantly, post-medieval watermarks as well. And I must admit that I'm a bit of a burnt child when it comes to IT people and IT structures. So when I was finishing my PhD, our IT consultant left, and we've never found adequate replacement. So a lot of the things that I planned for my PhD, for my postdoc, for another project, we were never able to do because we simply didn't find people who could do the stuff that we wanted to have been done. So in this way, I really prefer to dock onto an already existing database and not create my own, because I avoid the problems that can arise when you start a new database, and I don't need to worry about the sustainability and the longevity of the database, because other people are going to take care of that. So in this way, I think that it is easier for me to use an already existing database. Furthermore, the big advantage is that other scholars can directly profit from our data input. They don't need to wait until we build a database and finish the project. No, as soon as we put the data into the database, they are free to use it. And that's one big plus for the scholarly community. So the watermark imaging will be done with a hyperspectral line camera from the Fraunhofer Institute. So this is actually, it takes scans. It has 320 spatial pixels and a bandwidth of 1,000 till 2,500 nanometers. And it takes a scan of a watermark, and each scan is with 256 bands. So all in all, per individual scan that you take, you actually get 265 images. And then you can choose the ones that are best for you. It has a 30 centimeter lens with a scan height of 8 centimeters. So that's basically that much, and most watermarks are smaller. If you have larger watermarks, for example, the Arms of Amsterdam, you take 2 scans per watermark and then you stitch it together in post-production. The camera that we use is stable, so we put that fixed on the platform, and we actually move the paper past the camera while it takes a scan. And for that, we use a linear translation stage unit with a stepper motor and a metal frame where we basically fix the paper charters and manuscripts onto. And the heat source that you need for hyperspectral images comes from a halogen lamp with 1,000 watts, and which is fixed on a 2.7 meter tripod. And that's actually generating a lot of heat, and there are definitely conservational issues. We make sure that nothing gets more than 40 degrees Celsius, and also that the time that we use the lamp, that we actually use the heat, is as short as possible. So we only switch that lamp on when we take the scan. As soon as the scan is over, within a few seconds, the lamp is switched off. So in this way, we can prevent heat. So here you can see some images of the previous project where we used the camera. You can see the translation stage unit with the metal frame. In the left image, you can see a charter that we imaged, and on the right-hand side, you can see a manuscript that we had to prop up. So in the previous project, I was really unlucky because the infrared camera of our comparison partner broke beyond repair because we could take any images and we had to find a replacement, which was this hyperspectral camera. Now that camera is usually used for a much more industrial setting, for example, in detecting fungi in Australian crop. But it has never been used on cultural heritage objects before. So we had to find a quick and dirty and, most importantly, cheap solution, which is how we came up with this metal frame and various objects that you find in a conservationist workshop. So for the next project, Life of Paper, we hope to build something that is more professional and where we basically don't need to, which is basically easier to handle. Here you can already see some image of a watermark. This is a conventional image taken with backlighting and a mobile phone camera. Can anybody of you detect the watermark? Which one is it? What's the motive? Yes, indeed, it is a castle, but it's barely visible. Here you can see the first scan with around nearly 1,000 nanometers, so you can still see the ink, but it's already fading. This is conventional iron gall ink. Here you have the second scan with 1,600 nanometers, and if you look very closely, you can still detect traces, but that's actually very usual. Most of the iron gall ink that I find in Icelandic manuscripts is totally invisible between 1,200 and 1,500 nanometers, which is actually way beyond most infrared cameras. But this here, as I said, is a hyperspectral camera, which is a much wider bandwidth. So in this way, it's quite good. Here you can see another one at around 2,100 nanometers. For my personal research, I really preferred this one because the contrast is really high, and it's also fairly easy to see where the watermark was sewn onto the sieve, onto the mold. And then the next one at 2,500 already gets actually too grainy. So it's actually, so I personally think that around 1,600 nanometers gives the best results. Now to encode the data, in Icelandic manuscript catalogs, we use TI conformant XML. Now, the module that exists for watermarks is really not sufficient. The only thing that you can encode is basically the watermark motif type, the dimensions, and if you want to, you can also link data to an existing database. So here you can see what this looks like in XML and in the manuscript catalog. Now, because there's really just very basic information, a student, a PhD student at the University of Iceland created a customization. Gilda Müller did that. And this is based on the IPH standard. She customized two modules, one for watermark description and the other one for paper sheet. So that in that sense, you can actually not just encode data on the watermark, but on the whole sheet, including information on paper makers and paper mills. And with this, the aim is to standardize the representation of watermarks and watermark information, allowing for mining and comparing data from different watermark databases. Now, for paper that is not watermarked and paper that is reused, we are going to use the Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy. And that spectroscopy is a method that measures how much light an object absorbs in various wavelengths. So you basically cast a broadband light beam into mirrors that are rotated, and by this you create different wavelengths at different rates. The mirror casts the light onto the object, and the refracted light is used with the Fourier transform algorithm to basically calculate the absorbed light in a spectrum. And from this spectrum, you can determine the chemical components and the molecular decay of the object. So to put it fairly simple, what we are going to do is we calculate how much molecular decay there is in paper. So this method has already been used in heritage science, particularly archaeology with straw, wood, but also in codicology with parchment and leather. It has been tried once with historical paper and once with 20th century paper, and it works quite well. So we have great hopes that we can actually use this as well. Now, first we actually need to analyze dated charters and manuscripts to create a timeline, and the data from these we can then use to compare to undated material. So as I said, we're going to use that on reused paper in bindings, but also in apographs that the Icelandic manuscript collector Árni Magnússon commissioned in the early 18th century. So he basically had 6,000 apographs made, and he wrapped them in recycled paper. So we want to find out how old the paper is that he reused as wrappers. What we also want to do is to gain more insight into manuscript production, and for that we are going to use Viscol, created by Dot Porter at the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. You can use that for modeling and visualizing collations of manuscripts. So the main feature is really the information on the quire structures. How many leaves are there? Are they bifolia? Are they singletons? And the nice thing is that there is now a new version available where you can add much more information than that. You can add, most importantly, information. Where were leaves that are now missing? What are leaves that are added later? But you can also add information on hair side, flesh side if it's parchment. You can add information on text, but also on other things like where in the manuscript do you find historiated initials or illuminations, stuff like that. So we want to add information on textual contents and on watermarks. And we hope that with the visualization it will be easier to draw conclusions about manuscript productions. Were there stacks of papers used consecutively? Were there mixed stacks of papers used? And are there also, for example, can we draw conclusions on textual genesis and also on geographical, temporal, and societal differences in paper use? So you can see that we will face quite a lot of challenges, but the output might hopefully be great. So the challenges, I think, are mostly of a technical nature. We are going to use new methods and new tools, so there's always a bit of a risk involved. But if everything works out, we'll have quite the output. So we have 235 manuscripts in folio and 600 in quarto. We have 2 case studies. The first one with 3,400 untrimmed leaves in 14 manuscripts, and then 15 manuscripts from one scribe in one particular area. That was really important for manuscript production in the 16th and 17th century. And we also have around 15% of the 6,000 copies of charters, the apographs, so around 900 where paper was reused. And of course we also have reused paper in bindings, and there we still don't know yet how much there is. So the project is going to start in the summer, so please watch out, and I hope that at the next conference I will already be able to tell you more about the output. So thank you very much.